So I'd like to call to order the board meeting of SDCERS for today, which is July 12th, 2019. Yes. And I'd like to ask Cynthia if we have a quorum.
Yes, we have a quorum.
We have a quorum. I believe Jeff Wallace is absent, and Tanasi will likely walk in the door at any moment, hopefully. Do we have any non-agenda public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, great. So welcome, everybody, and as you know, we all are working today with a new tech system, a new agenda, technology package together with our board and voting package, and I know it's going to be great, and we all know how to use it because we've been trained, and we thank Dave Bond and his team for putting this together and leading us into the future, where we're going to really enjoy using this. Okay, and so at this point, we can move to the consent items under number 4, and we have, we have 4 items. One of them is education, which we have moved from typically what had been a later point in the presentation. And if there's anybody, there's a memo that we have regarding requested education for Lou. If there's anybody else who wants to raise their hand and propose something else, we can take it off the consent agenda. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead. Okay? So again, we have service retirements, drop entries, drop retirements, and education opportunities. And I believe I can make this, I can make this motion if we're ready to vote.
Usually have a second because this is an original motion.
Okay, so Charlie and George is fine.
Ready
Yeah.
to vote?
Thank you. That's fine, totally good. Okay, and that consent agenda passes 9 votes to 0. Thank you. Okay, our next item is business operations, and at this point, the action item is around election of board president, and I'm going to recognize Corinna Coleman as chair of the nominating committee for her comments.
Thank you, Carol. At our May meeting, the board approved a nominating committee to decide the member to be nominated before this board as its next president. And that committee consisted of Bobby Spoon and Charlie Hogquist, as well as Mike McBride, Tanasi Prevelos, and myself as the chair. And I'd like to recognize and thank those members for their service. The board policy governing the election of the board president allows for a board member to offer a candidate for consideration to the nominating committee and from the floor at this meeting. Good morning.
You're supposed to sit over here.
And following 2 of the meetings of the nominating committee, the committee has unanimously recommended that Carol Broad be our next board president. Carol has demonstrated her strong leadership talent in serving as our investment committee chair, and I've really enjoyed working with you on that committee. She's exhibited tremendous dedication, teamwork, and professionalism in all ways, and we believe that her collaborative style with fellow board members, staff, and consultants will facilitate conducting board business to ensure that we deliver timely and accurate benefits to our members and also ensure the safety, integrity, and growth of the trust assets. So with that, I would like to approve, or rather I would recommend that the board approve Carol Broad as SDCERS next board president.
Thank you.
And I'd like to make a motion for that.
Ready to vote?
You all voted?
All votes are in.
Okay, and that appears to have passed 9 votes to 0 with 1 abstention, which was me. So, well, thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words, Corinna. Did you have a comment, George?
I'd just like to offer a hand for
Thanks very much. I very much appreciate your vote of confidence. I look forward to working with all of you and hearing all your voices throughout the year to move our agenda forward and make great decisions for our system. And I think it's going to be a great year. And again, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, with that, we are going to move on to the next item, which is Audit Committee, and that is Bobby Spoon.
All right. The Audit Committee met on Wednesday of this week, and we had 2 action items. The first was to approve the 2020 internal audit plan as presented by Sarah Dixon, our internal auditor, and that passed unanimously. The second was to approve the expenditure on external IT auditors, and there's a document that's been passed out to the board this morning that addresses the types of things that we're asking the external auditors to audit. We had a very healthy discussion about the tasks that were going to be asked of the auditors and the fee. The fee, as proposed, is to allow the CEO to contract up to $100,000 a year. There was a little bit of sticker shock over that. However, when we looked at the scope of the audit and assessed the risk, we feel it is very significant. It's a very significant audit to have done, and the risk of not doing it is very significant, and we authorized that and passed it unanimously. It was then forwarded to the B&G committee, which you will hear about from Tanasi, but by the end of the B&G committee, there were 6 of us that had approved it. So, and it was a unanimous approval from the audit committee. We then moved to information items. We heard from our external auditors, MGO, and they presented the audit plan for this year, which will start very soon. Ted's really excited about that. It's going to give Ted a lot of hours in the office from now until the end of November. At the end of November, they're planning on presenting the final draft to the audit committee, and the final CAFR will be presented to the board in the January meeting. Is that right? January meeting. We also heard Sarah, are you here? We also heard Sarah's report for her 2019 audits. Sarah, you did a great job. That was a lot of work, and you got a lot of wonderful things accomplished this year. So congratulations on that. We're all very, very pleased and happy that you're here. We decided on the audit committee calendar for the year, and Johnny presented revisions, of course, to our auditor charter and the board process for a review of the internal auditor. And then we received reports from David Bond on IT, Sarah on internal audit, and Johnny on legal and compliance. And that's it.
Great. And so we don't need to vote on any of those items at this
You do
point?
not.
Right. Okay. Thanks so much. Great report. Next, we're going to move to B&G with the always tardy Tanasi. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped disability. What am I thinking?
She didn't mean to.
I didn't mean to.
Revoke her presidency.
I'm confused. No, sorry. Well, he came in late, and what can you do? Charlie, disability.
Good morning. Our Disability Committee met yesterday, and we actually almost tied Tenaciously record for short meetings. We only had a couple of items for review on our committee. We had 3 recommendations for disability retirement. 1 was a non-industrial, and 2 were industrial. And staff has recommended to approve a non-industrial disability retirement for Sylvia Munoz, and also an industrial disability retirement for Sylvestra Gradilla. And also recommended a denial of a disability retirement for Earl Byers. All the information was in the reports, and we approved those 3-0. And if there's no questions or comments from anybody, I move that we put them on the consent item for everybody's approval. Any questions?
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
Okay, and that passed.
And that
10
passes
votes to
10 to
0.
0. The only other item we had was an informational item. Sandra advised us on the status of our disability applications. We are doing very well. The number of applications is actually down, and they're processing them in a very timely manner, and no backlog or anything else. So had to thank the staff for their great work they've been doing. And that concludes the Disability Committee
Okay,
report.
Thank you for that. And now it's time for business and governance.
All right. We had a contentious and robust meeting. There was some mud wrestling that happened. But the long and the short of it is all of the consent items passed unanimously. We did hear from Johnny on the selection of tax counsel. For those of you who are wondering why there are 3 firms out there, it's because really I think what staff is asking for is to have some additional specialists available for them to work with when certain questions come up. There's nothing currently pending. I think that's the big takeaway from Johnny's position, is that there's nothing that they're currently worried about or pending, but want to make sure that we have the right people on the bench. I think we also had, the other big issue was the IT audits, which I think Bobby covered. It passed unanimously. I think considering the risk factor, there's really no option. The bid is reasonable. So I think when we looked at it all, it was less than $270 an hour for the work. So it's pretty, it's in line with what we should be doing. So those all passed unanimously. If there's no questions, I'd like to I'll move the consent agenda. Seeing none, I'm moving the consent agenda.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
All right, and that passes 10 to 0. On the information items, let's see. Cynthia, of course, gave a phenomenal presentation because I think they're doing a super job over there in client services. So that went very well. For those of you who might not have who missed the highlight, there was a new redesigned website that went live in June. So that apparently has gotten some rave reviews. With respect to the benefits administration, the retiree health open enrollment went smoothly. So I think that went well. The COLA is in process. So I think everything's on track at this point. I don't know if there's anything else that we need to chat about. David was the guy who was on the hot seat mostly because my program wasn't working. So I was giving him a bad time, and then of course he had me give our vendor over there a bad time because why not? He's here. So, but I think the bugs are all getting worked out. The good news is, actually, out of a show of hands, how's the on-base system working? All right. Okay. So, other than these black boxes here, which are retro 1960, I guess everything's all good. So we're fine. All right. Does staff want to add anything to my summary? Nope. Any questions from the committee members? Nope. That ends my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So next, we have Investment Committee, and we met yesterday. We had 3 action items that we're going to go over this morning and vote on them each individually. They were all passed unanimously at the committee. And the first one is going to be presented by Jamie, and it's the review of real estate investment policy and annual investment plan.
Great, thank you, Carol. Thank you, Cynthia. You have in front of you the review of the real estate investment policy and the updated real estate annual investment plan for fiscal year 2020. This item is brought in front of you on an annual basis. The real estate policy establishes the objectives, policies, and procedures for SDCERS real estate program. There are no recommended changes to the real estate investment policy for this year, so that item is simply just a holdover from last year, and it's for your information. The annual investment plan, on the other hand, this document summarizes the goals and initiatives for the real estate program over the next year, and this is a conversation that staff has with the consultant to help develop this plan on an annual basis. I'd like to walk you through the changes or the recommended actions to the 2020 annual investment plan. Beginning with the structural core program. This is designed to provide benchmark-like exposure to the NFI Odyssey, which is our benchmark for the real estate program. The first action item is to continue with the DWS transition plan. Currently, there are 4 assets remaining in the separate account. The plan is to sell 3 of these 4 assets in fiscal year 2020 for about $45 million in proceeds. The second action item is dealing with the UBS Trumbull Property Fund. In last year's annual investment plan, SDCERS submitted a partial request for this fund. In fiscal year 2020, the recommended action is to redeem the remaining $34 million in the UBS Trumbull Property Fund. The rationale for this is due to the underperformance over the 1, 3, 5, and 10-year periods. And with redemption requests growing, there is concern about performance on a go-forward basis. The third action within structural core deals with considering 1 new diversified core open-end commingled fund for a total of $65 million. This item will be brought forward as a separate action item at a later time, sometime throughout the fiscal year. And moving into the Tactical Core Equity Program. This is designed to provide complementary exposure to that structural core program. These investments can be short-term in nature. They can be sector-focused funds, meaning like industrial, multifamily, something along those lines, or a fund that can provide complementary exposure. That might be a fund that's maybe not as well diversified as one of the benchmark-like funds. There are 2 recommended actions here. The first is to redeem SDCERS investment in the AEW Core Property Trust for $85 million. This investment was considered a short-term hold when SDCERS exchanged separate account assets for shares of this fund. SDCERS has had this investment for about 3 years now. The rationale for this recommendation is really just a portfolio rebalancing. The remaining assets in the DWS separate account give SDCERS an office overweight. AEW's fund has a large exposure to office. Staff and the consultant believe that other tactical positions could provide diversification benefits to SDCERS portfolio. The second action item within Tactical Core is to consider a new Core Plus fund with industrial sector focus for $50 million. This will be addressed in the next action item and considered for your approval. And then finally, moving into non-core real estate. The action here is to target up to $60 million in new commitments for non-core strategies. Staff and the consultant will be looking to 2 to 4 funds between $15 to $30 million each. The focus will be on value-add investments rather than opportunistic, as these investments are lower risk and can have a more defensive posture given where we are point in cycle. Some examples of funds that staff and the consultant are considering is a multifamily specialist fund, an industrial specialist fund, and that would be within the non-core space as opposed to core that is on for action later today, and also a diversifying European fund, such as something like a Nordic fund that can have some offsetting exposure to SDCERS' current investment within Europe. With that, I would open it up for questions.
Questions? No questions. Okay, thank you for your comments, and we are now ready to vote. And this did, as I mentioned earlier, pass unanimously at the committee.
Ready to vote?
Is that how we're supposed to do that? Yeah, I think I should have moved it, right?
Well,
Okay. I'm pushing this box that Tanasi likes so much. Okay. Yeah. I should have. Sorry about that. I failed at technology.
that's
So is this okay, the way we have it? George has
okay,
moved and no
it's fine.
second? Yeah, okay, great. So we're voting. You're waiting for me.
all votes are in.
Okay, thank you. That vote passes 10-0. So next, the next action item Jamie's going to continue to talk about is the recommended $50 million commitment to the DWS Core Plus Industrial Fund.
Thank you. As previously mentioned, this fund will fit into the Tactical Core Equity allocation. And as was just discussed within the annual investment plan, the recommended addition of this fund will provide complementary exposure to SDCERS core real estate investments and will help to offset SDCERS current underweight to the office sector due to the remaining assets in the DWS separate account and to the underweight to the industrial sector. The Core Plus Industrial Fund is an open-end Core Plus Industrial Fund seeking to invest in core and non-core industrial assets. The fund strategy will focus on high-quality industrial investments with core, transitional, and development properties primarily located in and around U.S. metropolitan areas, with an emphasis on infill or open space in urban locations. The fund's objective is to provide gross returns of 50 to 100 basis points over the performance of the NCREIF Property Index Industrial Sub-Index. And on a since inception basis, they have been able to provide about 11.1%, which compared to that benchmark is at 10.4%. So they have been able to outperform over a since inception basis, just to give you some context around what that number actually looks like. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about this fund.
Could I ask you to comment briefly on their relationship to Deutsche Bank
Absolutely.
and how that's changed over time? Because we all hear about Deutsche Bank risk in the news.
So there was some news this week about Deutsche Bank doing some restructuring. And as we know from the media, Deutsche Bank has been struggling in general. DWS had been part of the larger Deutsche Bank operation. About 18 months ago, they had done an initial public offering and to take themselves public. And while Deutsche Bank remains the largest shareholder, they are publicly traded, which takes the risk down from DWS. It's a lot of acronyms, the DWS and the
certainly
DV. From DWS's business. Is there anything else you'd like me to?
No, that's fine. I mean, I think the point is that it really operates as an independent company. They aren't compensated in Deutsche Bank stock.
Correct.
And
They're
really
compensated in DWS stock.
Pardon me.
They're compensated in
in
DWS
their own
stock,
stock, right?
yes.
So, yeah. So that discussion sort of allayed any concerns we had about Deutsche Bank relative to this investment. Okay, any other questions? Then I'm going to make a motion, and I think I'm on the right screen. Help me out if I'm not. You're doing great. Hey, there it is. Okay.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
That vote passes 10-0. Okay, thank you very much, Jamie, for your work on that. So our third action item is to approve the investment policy statement, which I believe we do annually, and Liza's going to give us just a few quick comments, and then we're going to vote.
Thank you. Good morning. The Investment Policy Statement, or IPS, is the key document that governs the investment function at SDCERS. The IPS outlines SDCERS's investment philosophy, its investment goals and objectives, and the roles and responsibilities of various key parties. This IPS is the guide that gives the investment committee and the board the control and the ability to direct items such as asset allocation, rebalancing parameters, monitoring and reporting by various entities, risk monitoring, governance practices, establishing appropriate benchmarks, and it outlines the duties of the investment committee, staff, and all the external consultants and vendors. This document is reviewed on an annual basis, not only by staff, but by a governance group at Aon, and it's supposed to reflect any changes to the investment portfolio, any legal or regulatory developments. You'll recall a couple years ago we had to make a change because California law stated that we had to disclose private equity fees. And if there are any updates to current best practices. This year, there are only a few minor updates to the policy, and they are outlined in the Aon memo, and it's really just adding a little bit of clarifying language to a couple areas, so nothing significant. And that concludes my comments.
Great. Yeah, I would also like to emphasize that as a policy-driven organization, this document is really important because it gives the framework for how we as a board participate in the investment program, and what the roles and responsibilities are amongst staff and outside service providers. So this is our opportunity to understand and codify our role and others in investments. So thank you. And with that, if there are no further questions, I will make a motion to approve.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that also passes 10-0. Thank you, Liza. Okay, that concludes our 3 action items. Next, we have information items, and we're just going to cover this kind of briefly. Number 1, we had John Muir in from State Street Global Markets to discuss the securities lending program, which is ongoing and add some value to our investment program. And I'll let you read that at your leisure. We're going to have Anders come on up and give us some highlights from Aon's Total Fund Performance Group, report. And we're not going to present the next 3 items, Stepstone, although John Coelho was here from Stepstone and made a great presentation. We also looked at GCM Grosvenor's report and heard from Townsend on the real estate performance. We're going to, those items are kind of embedded in what Anders is going to talk about, and we'll let you look at those reports independently. So take it away, Anders.
All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give you some highlights on the first quarter of 2019 performance for the total fund. The quarter ended with a 6.7% return, slightly trailing the benchmarks 7%. And this page, I'm just going to go through this, talks about the Sharpe ratio, and that's basically how well SDCERS is compensated for the level of risk we're taking. And this is on a peer universe ranking. On a 3-year basis, SDCERS total fund ranks in the top 7% of all public pension plans when it comes to performance for the level of risk taken. And over the last 5 years, we're in the top 6%, and over the last 10 years, we're in the top 16%. And the next item I'll cover is just talk a little bit about asset class performance. As you can see, pretty much all asset classes did very well on an absolute basis, trailed a little bit in some asset classes on a relative basis, but most asset classes actually outperformed their benchmark individually as well. The only outlier there is the opportunity fund, as you can see, 2.4% versus the benchmark 10.1%. And the reason that is because we measure the opportunity fund against our 78% stocks and 22% fixed income mix. And since stocks did so well in the first quarter, we have investments in the opportunity fund that do not have exposure to the stock market. That's the reason why. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
I don't know, you can ask that question. I think it is. Any questions? Great. Well, as we've heard, we continue to have really great peer relative and absolute and risk-adjusted returns in our investment program, and benefit from the diversification and thought that's gone into our manager selection and our overall approach. So thank you.
Yep.
So with that, in the interest of being super efficient, we will also let you read Susan Youngflush's annual report on securities litigation at your leisure, item 6, and as well as staff reports. And that concludes the investment committee. This is going to be the world's fastest meeting.
Congratulations.
I know, that's my goal in life. Okay, so, oh my gosh. I don't know. Well, there's an empty seat right over here. Okay, oh, that's okay. Okay, so finally, as we conclude, are there questions, comments from the president, trustees, and staff? And I understand Greg has some comments.
Yes, I do. Thank you. First, I would like to congratulate you, Carol. Really looking forward to your leadership and working with you in the coming year, so congratulations. And I'd like to wish the entire board a Happy New Year. It's our new fiscal year. And it's our new fiscal year. And as Bobby had mentioned, this means that our external auditor, MGO, will begin their audit. They're already well into their field work and planning. And so coming Monday, they'll be on site here, starting with test of controls over significant transaction streams. So they provide us audit services to make sure that our financial statements are appropriately stated. So we're looking forward to working with them coming up. I'd also like to update you on the replacing our on-site computer room's uninterruptible power supply. UPS, at our last meeting, you may recall, I said that on April 1st, we, on a city holiday, we powered down our IT system. We installed 2 of the 3 UPS units. Regrettably, the 3rd unit had a wrong plug, and we weren't able to input it, but that was great. We powered it up. Units 1 and 2 are working great, except you might recall our communications router to the city had died, and the SDCERS staff and our IT consultant from Atos worked through the weekend to install the new router so that when we came up Monday morning, we were A-OK. So jumping forward past that, the building scheduled a power outage for June 7th. And we thought, what a perfect time to put in unit number 3. So the building powers down, we install the 3rd UPS unit, and we power back up Saturday afternoon, and the 3rd unit was dead on arrival. It didn't work. But things just got worse from there. The AT&T switch, which we have no control over, also didn't power up for 4 tenants. And as fate would have it, we were one of the 4 tenants. And the reason this is very important is basically when the AT&T switch goes down, we become invisible to all of our members. The website doesn't work, the call center doesn't work, our email doesn't work. Pretty much nothing works.
Does any of that explain Cynthia's great call times?
It's
I'm just curious. I just wanted to all right, just a second.
And operationally, we are unable to communicate with our bank to make tax deposits, fund wire transfers. I mean, so this is a critical component. But I would like to appreciate Dave and his staff. By Monday morning, there was a AT&T tech on site, and Sunday morning, and by Sunday night, we were back up. So there's a lot of things that happen here. We try to make it look easy, but there's a lot of challenges and hoops and hurdles that we have to jump through. So thank you for David Bond and his team for keeping our systems going. I'd also like to mention that at our board offsite this past February, we had a great presentation from Johnny Tran about lessons learned from the pension scandal. And just wanted to let you know that that word has gotten out, and we're starting to get requests for people to share that story, which I think is very important in our governance structure. So we will be visiting the mayor's office to talk to them, which is very important. And also, interestingly, the Orange County Employees Retirement System is interested in proper governance and would like to also learn about what happened back then and how to avoid those types of those issues. I'd like to take a couple minutes to recognize some staff. First of all, Liza Krisafi, who was on a CIO panel for the Girls Who Invest class. This is sponsored by Girls Who Invest organization and the Mendoza College of Business at Notre Dame. It's a 4-week class for female college students from across the United States combined with an internship. And this is a great organization, Girls Who Invest. Their goal is to bring more women into portfolio management and leadership. And they have a 30-30 initiative, which is women managing 30% of the world's investable capital by 2030. They state that asset management is behind other professions where about 1/3 of the doctors are women and 1/3 of the lawyers are women. So they want to bring asset management up there. On the panel with Liza were CIOs from Los Angeles City and San Francisco City Employee Retirement Systems. I'd also like to recognize Johnny Tran and Susan Youngflish for being on panels at the National Association of Public Pension Attorneys, or NAPA. Susan moderated the Cybersecurity in Practice, operationalizing the legal role in protecting pension assets and private information to fit your agency. and Johnny spoke on 2 panels, attorney-client relationships of in-house counsel, and public retirement board governance and the role of the dissenter opinion on the board. I don't know why you were the expert on that, but thank you. But this is, NAPA is a great technical conference, and if you heard that Johnny and Susan were going to NAPA, it was not in the Bay Area, it was here in San Diego. It was a local conference. I'd also like to recognize Michelle Wegner-Malecki, Michelle, for her work and diligence putting this new information system together. It was actually a very complicated and complex project that really required us to completely rip out all the infrastructure with regards to putting together the board agenda, doing the pushing to the iPads, all of our video and live streaming in this board system. So I just really wanted to appreciate her for putting together the requirements, putting together the design considerations, training staff, and implementing everything. So thank you very much, Michelle. And finally, I would like to highlight the need to be vigilant against email hack attacks. Early one morning in May, as staff were commuting to work, various SDCERS staff received a special request email from me. It said, "I will be having a busy day. I need your help to execute an important purchase for the staff with gifts. Your confidentiality will be appreciated. Email me back when you get this." And it said, "Sent from my mobile device." And our IT team categorized this phishing attack as exceptional because most staff would be viewing this on their smartphones, and it's harder to identify this as a bogus email. Fortunately, our SDCERS staff receive regular reminders about internet security from Dave Bond and his team, and no one purchased gifts and sent them to the scammers. Although I will say a couple staff did come up to me later and said if I ever really did want to buy gifts for staff, they would be glad to help. And this concludes my comments. Thank you.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, thanks very much, Greg. I actually did want to make one more comment. I meant to say earlier that I'll be making a recommendation for a vice president of the board and bringing that to you all for vote at the next meeting. And if there are no further comments, discussion,
One more?
questions? What?
Carol, I had
Oh,
one more comment. I
Yes.
wanted to give the board a brief update on the Proposition B litigation.
okay, great.
Yeah, as expected, the 4 city unions have filed a leave or request from the California Attorney General to file an action in Superior Court in order to invalidate Proposition B. In summary, the unions argue that because the city violated meet and confer laws under the Myers-Millis-Brown Act, that Proposition B in its entirety has to be invalidated. In June, the City Council voted to support the unions in this effort, so that's a different change of position, and I understand that they should be filing a document with the Attorney General as well. So the citizen proponents, the ones who claim that they started this initiative, are opposing the union efforts. The next stage in this is the Attorney General, without really a deadline, will decide whether or not to provide leave, give permission for the unions to file a lawsuit, and if granted, then the lawsuit will happen in San Diego Superior Court. Any questions on that? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Okay. George?
Actually, I was wondering if we could get some comments from Greg as to what does it mean for us? And what does it mean for SDCERS?
Certainly. So at this point, SDCERS is well-positioned to support whatever the unions and the plan sponsor of the city decide to do with future benefits for employees. Again, they still need to discuss that and talk about that and negotiate that. So we have our infrastructure ready, we have our IT systems flexible enough to address any issues. Staff are doing a good job to make sure we don't have backloads of work. So depending on what happens, we're ready to go. At this point, we're in a wait and see. We still have a period of time that we need to wait for the Attorney General to go through their process. Then the Superior Court will need to address this. And then the city and the unions will need to negotiate in which manner will they implement taking care of the Court of Appeals decision.
That's all well and good, but what I meant was, what does it mean financially for SDCERS?
Oh, financially, I would say that if members are returned into the plan, we will have the required contributions coming in for that service credit that, for those members. And so that will be something that the unions and the employer will be negotiating. In what manner does that happen? So moving forward, we will be made whole to make sure that those payments are paid for. And they need to be made upfront as opposed to being put into the UAL and paid over an extended period of time.
Okay. I think that then concludes, one more.
Could someone comment on the procedure and prospects for filling our vacancies on the board?
Do you want to do that?
Certainly. We do have 2 vacancies currently on the board for 2 members that had completed their terms of service and by charter required to leave board service. We do have 2 applicants that have submitted applications to the mayor's office. The mayor's office has reviewed those applications and found them acceptable. And right now, those 2 candidates will then be reviewed by the city council for appointment to the board. We are really hoping that, we're actually expecting that to happen before our September meeting.
Okay, with that, I was told I could use a gavel. Oh, closed session? No closed session. Okay. Anything else? No more business? Meeting is adjourned.
Nice.